There's a quiet shift that happens in the human heart. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't announce itself with loud alarms or flashing warning lights. It is the slow, silent drift away from grace, not because God moved, but because we did. And the moment grace becomes distant, something else immediately takes its place. Something heavier, something harsher, something that feels completely normal and responsible at first, but slowly begins to suffocate us from the inside out. I am Godwin and welcome back to JengaPod. Today, we are in episode 2 of our Walk in Grace series. In our last episode, we talked about stepping out of the courtroom in your mind. Today, we are going deeper, darker, and getting brutally honest. We're talking about what actually happens when we don't choose grace. Not in theory, but in our real lives, our real relationships, and our real spiritual struggles. Now, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to look at the collateral damage of a graceless life. We'll explore the 3 distinct areas where lack of grace silently destroys us: our psychology, our spirituality, and our relationships. I'm going to share a powerful story about what happens when we start keeping score with people we love, and I'll give you a practical way to recognize when you have slipped into a victim mindset. Now, if you've been feeling spiritually restless, easily irritated, or like you are constantly failing an invisible test, this episode is going to show you exactly why and how to stop the spiral. Alright, let's look at the first principle. Principle 1, the psychological audit, the danger of scoreboard. When we drop grace, we immediately pick up a clipboard. We start treating our lives like a ruthless performance audit. Without grace, your inner voice becomes an obsessed auditor. It stops looking at your humanity and only looks at your metrics. It says things you would never say to someone else, putting labels on yourself. It exaggerates your flaws and entirely minimizes your progress. We suffer more in our own imagination than we do in reality. And that is what Seneca says. And a graceless mind is a factory for that suffering. So slowly you begin to see yourself exclusively through the lens of your mistakes. You start to believe that your failures define you. And this is what psychologists call identity distortion, when who you think you are becomes violently disconnected from who God says you are. So when the distortion grows, you slip into victim mindset. You begin to feel like something is happening to you, not through you. You lose your agency because without grace, you are left alone with your own raw strength, and your strength was never meant to carry the weight of perfection. Now, principle 2, the spiritual consequences. That performance Christianity, that performance faith. Now, this psychological audit bleeds directly into your spiritual life. When grace is missing, faith becomes a performance. You start to believe that God is disappointed in you. You start to believe that you need to fix yourself before coming to Him. But here's the truth: God never moved. Your shame just blinded you. This feeling of distance from God is not because He withdrew. It is because guilt builds walls where God builds doors. When guilt becomes your theology, you fall into performance Christianity or faith life. You pray to impress, you serve to be accepted, you worship just to feel worthy, you obey out of frantic fear of punishment, not out of love. Faith becomes a checklist, spirituality becomes a scoreboard, and God becomes a strict supervisor instead of a loving father. Now here's the result: deep, exhausting spiritual restlessness. You're doing everything right on paper, but you feel completely empty because grace is the oxygen of the soul, and without it, you suffocate. Hey, a quick gentle reminder: if this episode is speaking to you, pause for a second and hit the like or follow button. Growing a space for intentional living happens one person at a time, and your support helps us to build just that. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music, make sure to follow so you never miss an episode. Awesome, let's keep going. Now, principle 3, the relationship ripple effect, no second chance culture. Here's the part we often overlook, and it is the most destructive. How you treat yourself eventually becomes how you treat others. Now, there's a classic story of a man who was obsessed with justice. Every time someone wronged him, a friend who was late, a brother who spoke sharply, a co-worker who dropped the ball, he wrote it down in a little ledger he kept in his breast pocket. He thought he was protecting himself. He thought he was being wise. Years went by, the ledger filled up. One day, he felt deeply ill and needed help. He reached out to his brother, his friends, his co-workers, but when they arrived at his house, they didn't see a friend in need. They just saw the man who had held their very mistake over their heads for decades. The man opened his pocket to read them their past crimes, but realized he was utterly alone. His pursuit for perfect justice had cost him his community and his relationships. So do not be that guy. Do not be the guy who keeps scorecards. Do not be the guy who cannot allow others to get away with things that are part of humanity. Sometimes the things that we think are imperfect, if we just observe carefully, they could be colors to people's lives, and that's the way to look at it sometimes. That is not to say that you should let people get away with mistakes or damages, but rather you should give yourself that ability to give people second chances, to give people time to learn and to grow. So this is how relationships. So if you do not give yourself second chances, you will not give them to anyone else. If you live with no room for error, you will subconsciously demand perfection from everyone around you. Now things like, I did this so you do the same, and so on. This is how relationships become fragile. This is how friendships become conditional. Without grace, love becomes transactional. You start keeping score, you start withholding affection until they earn it. You create a culture around you where people feel unsafe, where mistakes are fatal, and where vulnerability is dangerous. When grace leaves your heart, it evicts love from your relationships. Now let's look at the emotional spiral and the turning point. When you don't choose grace, life becomes impossibly heavy. You become reactive, defensive, easily irritated, and not because you are a bad person, but because you are carrying a weight you are never meant to carry. And that's when the emotional spiral hits: overthinking, self-doubt, anxiety, isolation. But here's the good news: you don't have to stay there. Grace is not a reward for the perfect people. It is a lifeline for the struggling. It is not for the strong, it is for the tired. The moment you stop trying to earn love, the moment you drop the clipboard and stop keeping score, things begin to make sense. The accusations go silent. The Father steps in, not to condemn you, but to completely restore you. Hey, a quick gentle reminder: if this episode is speaking to you, pause for a second and hit the like or follow button. Growing a space for intentional living happens one person at a time, and your support helps us to build just that. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music, make sure to follow so you never miss an episode. Awesome, let's keep going. Now to conclude, I would love to give you a summary and key takeaways. So let's look in the core takeaways from today. If you want to stop the silent drift away from grace, remember these three things. Number one, a graceless mind creates identity distortion. You are not the sum total of your mistakes. As I said earlier, your mistakes do not have to define you. Just like in our previous episode when we looked at the water bearer, the leakage in the pot provided a way to water the seeds along the path. So your mistakes could be viewed as such, or your flaws, the things that you are not perfect at, could be viewed as a way to color your life. Now, number two, your performance faith turns God into a supervisor. God does not want your perfect checklist. He wants you. Sometimes we forget that you are humans, and there are times where we fall short. But our shortcomings do not have to be the defining factor of who we are. we can redefine ourselves. We can choose to embrace ourselves and love who we are unconditionally, just like the way God loves us. Number 3, how you treat yourself is how you treat others. If you want deep unconditional relationships, you have to start applying unconditional grace to yourself. So loving yourself is the secret to knowing how you can love another person. Because when you don't view yourself as a person to love, you will not be able to love other people. You will not be able to relate with other people if you hardly relate to yourself. In our Christianity, Jesus tells people to love thy neighbor as they love themselves. So you cannot love somebody else if you do not have the love inside of you. You cannot give what you don't have. So you have to have it within you to give grace to yourself before you can be able to give grace to others. Now, here's your call to action. These are the practical steps for this week. I want you to do a scoreboard check. So sometime today, write down one relationship, either with a friend, a partner, or even with God, where you have been secretly keeping a score. Acknowledge the ledger and consciously make the choice to tear that page out. Give them the grace you so desperately need yourself. Now, if this episode brought some clarity to a heavy season you are in, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this series. And leave a review and share with someone who needs to hear it. Now, in our episode 3, which is coming next, we are moving from theory into daily practice. We are going to talk about how to choose grace every single day, not as a concept, but as a hardwired lifestyle. But for now, just take a breath. Let grace find you again. You don't have to carry everything anymore. Grace is waiting and it's ready for you. It's just enough, perfectly enough. Now, having said so, this is Godwin and you are listening to JengaPod, Grace Series. And I look forward to see you in episode 3. Thank you so much for tuning in and see you soon. Thank you.